What's up, everybody? This is Phil Rogacki.
And I'm Jared Abergina.
You're listening to Two Tree Guys Podcast.
We want to welcome everyone. We're on the Two Tree Guys Podcast. I'm flanked by two arborists. My name is Geoff Carpenter. I'm a arborist out of northern Colorado. To the right of me is Ryan Grady, and to the left of me is Alex McIntosh. We're going to be going over just some stuff that happens here in northern Colorado, kind of talking about our life experiences, talking about a bit of some mentorship, some close calls we had, maybe why we got into tree work,
And what's keeping us in it?
Yes. I really want to just start and probably throw the floor over to my man Grady here. He's got a really interesting backstory, so we'll let him get us rolling. And why don't you take the mic, Grady?
Sure. I mean, what got me into tree work? That's a really good question. I think it was a couple things, really. I love the outdoors. Obviously, any tree guy is going to want to be outdoors, as opposed to being stuck in an office somewhere, Really, I got my foot in the door with Wildland Fire. That was a big step for me to come forward and, really kind of put my skills to use as, not just physical labor, but being able to, really kind of take in my surroundings and learn from practical experiences, being pragmatic about things and being able to, use situational awareness to overcome some pretty dangerous situations and stay in a high-risk environment and have fun doing it. And then I decided kind of that I like the warm touch of a woman a lot more than I like sleeping in the dirt. So, traveling around with the hotshot crew was not as likable as being able to go home to my sweet wife, Randy, and now my two beautiful daughters, Delaney and Odessa.
Ryan, why don't you give us a little bit of context on that? From what I remember, it was just prior to us becoming colleagues, and you were working on, I think it was the High Park fire, correct?
Yes, High Park fire. That was back in 2013 here in Larimer County, Colorado. I think at the time, that was the second biggest fire in Colorado history. I think it was somewhere around, don't quote me on this, but around 80,000 acres.
Yeah, I remember it mainly being contained up there in the sort of the Hewlett Gulch area, if I remember correct.
That was one of the ignition points is pretty close to around the Buckhorn Canyon area. So, and it just spread out from there. But yeah, that was one of the many fires that I was on. But that was kind of towards the end of my fire career, moving more towards tree work. But that was wildfire, definitely using chainsaws and doing tree work. I mean, basically, as a wildland firefighter, you're just a high-speed gardener out digging in the dirt.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's to be able to make the transition from that over to tree work was actually pretty easy. It's, you can apply a lot of the same techniques and as far as just being out there, using situational awareness and being really aware of what's going on around you in a volatile atmosphere, it was easy to make the transition. And the best part about tree work now is I can still use all the knowledge that I acquired during fire and apply that to tree work. So I carry that with me still. But anyways, enough about me, Geoff. Let's talk about you.
Oh, shucks. Well, I like to consider myself a veteran of the industry. I got my start when I was about 16 years old. I actually had the opportunity in high school to do like a half high school, half tech school opportunity. So during that portion of my high school day, I'd actually go out and I'd work on a log landing for about 2 years. And in that time, we were actually doing a lot of what we call a white pine harvest, doing a lot of timber felling for International Paper in Georgia Pacific, basically.
How old were you when you started that?
16.
16?
Yeah.
So you were still in high school?
Yeah, I'm in high school, 16. I have a bit of saw handling experience, that situation where you know enough to be dangerous and not enough to be good. is the scenario that I was in. You know, learning to run a saw, learning to fell big trees. You know, I had a series of shortcomings, but always had really great support around me. So I was able to learn from my mistakes and move forward. You know, after that, I pursued a degree in forestry, and that kind of landed me out here in Colorado. And now I function as a climber, and I function as a subject matter expert in California, trying to just share my knowledge and expertise, and as we all know, make a little money doing the same thing.
Nice.
A little money, yeah, a little bit here and there.
So Grady, did you go to college for forestry? Or
No, I didn't go to I didn't get a 4-year degree for forestry. I just got my wildland fire red card.
Yeah.
Basically right out of high school and jumped right into that.
Gotcha.
Which is a semester-long class, and I think anybody with an IQ over, you know,
Yeah.
anybody can pass that. So
Sure. Yeah, because I was wondering, because I was exactly the opposite, where, you know, I kind of went and got my college degree, did this whole like graphic design thing, was like, oh, I'm going to be a designer, and then found out that was a dying breed, because at the time my teacher was basically teaching me how to make design work for print, which at that time the cell phone, iPhone came out, and now everything's digital, and no one really was aware of that. So I graduate with this pretty much pointless degree, and I'm just looking for any trade whatsoever.
right.
Someone's like, hey, they'll hire anyone here at the time it was called Swingle. You could push an aerator, that's all you have to do. And I was like, oh, like $15 an hour? I'll push an aerator, I'll do whatever you want me to do. So I start pushing an aerator, and then all of a sudden I find out people are using ropes and chainsaws in a tree, and I'm like,
Oh, that looks sweet.
I was like, that, I want to fucking do that.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and then, so I'm actually pretty, compared to you two, I'm only like 7 years in, so I've little to no experience, I guess, in the realm of, I guess, what most people typically have, I guess.
I wouldn't call our scenarios typical, to be honest with you. Most people that I know have that sort of 5 to 7 years experience, and
Sure.
and normally I feel like it's after that third year mark is when you sort of develop yourself into that opportunity. If you want to become that foreman level climber, that foreman level forestry operator, usually comes around 3 or 4 years. Some people don't like that responsibility. I've met lifelong ground guys. I've met everybody in every fathom in this industry, and you know, they all have an important role to play, I believe.
Oh, yeah. I actually had an issue with that. We had an amazing ground operator. I mean, he could run ropes like no one else. And another company came and offered him a few more dollars and took him away. And the boss wouldn't pay him. And I was like, this is back at Saving Tree. I was like, so he's got a CDL. He can run ropes. He can do all of the equipment. And you don't want to give him a raise to keep him around?
Pay him.
Yeah, exactly. Like climbing isn't everything in this industry. And I think that's going to be a hard obstacle, I think, for this industry in general to step over. Is like, if you're not on a rope, you're not worth anything, which is, in my opinion, not.
BS.
Yeah.
I think people are coming around to that a little bit, because it doesn't matter if you're in the office or if you're out in the field.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a role to play, and it's really, really important that you have everybody, cohesive enough to be able to work together to achieve a common goal. And most of the time, that common goal is to not only just go home safe, but bottom line.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So, and there's going to be a lot of stress, you know, sometimes more so than other times,
Sure.
you know, but
Definitely.
I mean, you're chasing that bottom line in a production tree atmosphere, whereas it might be a little different in like a municipality, where you're not out there chasing the bottom line. You just have like your own backyard to take care of, essentially, which would be, you know, maybe at a university. And that would be, you know, that was kind of my goal for a while, and then I moved back out of that.
Sure.
Just because, you know, for certain reasons.
Definitely.
Well, I think the industry just seems to attract the type of person that is sort of multifaceted. I'm speaking from my own experience now, but I've worn just about every hat the industry has to offer. I've been the grunt ground guy. I've been the dirty PHC, man.
PHC. Spraycation.
Exactly. I've been a climber apprentice. You know, I've been, you know, a lead climber. I've you know, as you grow through, like I said, you wear all these hats, but at the end of the day, I still do every fathom of the job. Just kind of back to what we were just discussing. You know, there was this mentality of hierarchy, I think, for a lot of years in the arbor industry, where it's like the climbers are elite. When their feet touch the ground, they don't touch a lick of brush. They don't, you know, their main role is to perform this tree surgery, and more so now I see these guys where they're not just the tree surgeons, but there's this push for education, making them tree experts.
Yeah.
They know this.
Yeah, and this doesn't just apply for owner operators, but if you're really well rounded as a tree guy or girl, then you're good at all of those things. You can run a crane, and you know your PHC, and you can give you know, accurate assessments of what needs to happen to, you know, keep a urban forest healthy.
Yeah.
So you're not just keeping your foot in one of those roles. You are good at a lot of those roles.
Yeah. And I know one thing too, like, because we were on the subject of being a climber makes you elite in a mentality state, but I think a lot of people who do climb every day realize how much they don't want to climb every day.
Yeah.
It's so tough on your body. And I think a lot of people who aren't climbing every day aren't aware that climbing every day is not as enjoyable as it may sound.
Right.
So
you're spending 40 plus hours a week in a harness.
It's rough.
It can be rough. Yeah.
Honestly, for me personally, in my experience, I started this gig. You know, I started out as a rock climber, ice climber, and I wanted to take this passion that I had for this thing that I love so much and put it into my occupation. But unfortunately, what I found with that was, you know, the more that I had to climb in order to maintain my lifestyle, the more disconnect I had with it.
Yeah.
And I had to sort of kind of create these boundaries in order to make myself feel okay with this transition of taking something that you're passionate about as a hobby and you make it a profession, but things become, I feel, less appealing when it changes from something that you want to do to something that you have to do.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I learned that through the river. So like I guess in my pastime, I'm a avid whitewater kayaker. And then I started doing whitewater like rafting guides and stuff like that. And that's when I came to the realization that maybe my passion shouldn't be my job too. And luckily climbing kind of fills that void of, I really like the adrenaline. I like being outdoors, but it's not 100% my passion. So it's like it's a good offset.
Because it's definitely work.
Yeah, 100% work.
Yeah.
There's days you wake up and you're like, man, I got a migraine. But guess what? I'm still going to be riding a ball on the crane 100 foot up in the air, and it's real now. So
let's switch gears here for a minute, guys, and let's think about some things here where I would maybe we go through and talk about if you could tell yourself one thing 10 years in the past, what would you tell the past self 10 years ago about this industry?
Wow.
And try to help yourself navigate what you guys have experienced.
Jeffy with a thinker. Oh. I'm going to need a minute to marinate on that. Where's that beer at?
I'll jump into it. So all right. So I guess a good analogy of this scenario is like, so I want to kind of use the metaphor of MMA. So MMA, when it first started, was like you had your skill set. So for me, I was a wrestler, right? And then someone else was a boxer. And then they put these two people into a ring and they start fighting it out, and whoever's asset usually worked for them to win whatever it may be. But now, these days, MMA is a scenario where you're fucking good at everything, right?
And yeah, I follow the sport pretty intimately, and yeah, we see these young guys coming out, and
They've been training every aspect of it.
they're complete. They're not.
Yeah.
You're saying they're not one piece of the puzzle. They're coming with their hands in every bit of the bag.
One of the things that always good for me was I had a boss who was really in depth into tree climbing and actually was one of the trainers of where we're at right now at Academy at one time back in the day when it was called Rats. And I was lucky enough to kind of be growing up in that mixed martial arts arena of tree climbing that I was like already enveloped in SRT, how to hold like all the training techniques and everything that we learned today. I was like already present to me. So it's hard for me to like answer that question. Basically is what I'm saying is that I'm new to the industry with someone that really helped me grasp all of the advanced techniques that have already been in the market maybe for 10 years or so.
Alex, I gotta say you're a very, very knowledgeable person.
No, that's
for
valid.
being in the industry for as long as you have. You know a lot more than a lot of people who have been in for a much longer time.
Yeah.
And it's extremely useful, especially for me since we work together at Fine Tree Service. I can just ask you a question whenever I need to, and I know I'm going to have a good answer. Yeah, so kudos to you for that.
I'm going to actually jump in here and, kind of wrap up what you said and say if I could talk to myself, it sounds like you would probably give a similar message where it's just, first thing I would tell myself is to stay humble. Don't let your head get too big because this thing can get away from you, The second thing I would tell myself is to slow down. There's plenty of time to get to where you want to go. Just take your time. Nobody's really special. There's so much immense talent out there. I experienced my career where I blew up really big and then I hit the industry, and I found it was very humbling for me because I was that scenario, big fish in a small pond.
Yeah.
Where I grew up in northern New York, up in the Adirondacks, just outside of Lake Placid there, and we have pretty rigorous tree culture, but for the most part, there's not an immense population. So when I actually hit the industry and started seeing guys like working with the Matt Carruthers, the Axel Avillas, the Jared Abergeens, these guys who are Charlie Wagner, these iconic people, you really step back and realize like, oh man, like there's
got a lot more to go.
Well, you're special, but there's so many special people out here, and they all have their own valid things. So that being said, the last thing I would probably tell myself is just keep an open mind.
Right.
Keep an open mind. Be ready to learn, and in those instances, you're going to be successful.
And know your limits too.
To curtail off of that, I'd have to say the same thing. I mean, if I'm gonna give myself some advice to my former self, first getting in the industry, I think the most important thing is to. It's really easy to put things under a microscope on a day-to-day situation. I mean, no day's gonna go perfect, and certain days are gonna go a lot worse. But if you can just take a step back, because accidents do happen in this industry, and some of them are pretty fucking horrendous.
Yeah.
Now, there are certain things that are going to escalate and become a catalyst to those kinds of accidents happening, right? So, and a lot of the times I think it's because certain things are just put under a microscope and exacerbated because people are just in that moment and they can't take a step back and look at the bigger picture.
Sure.
I haven't been in anything too bad, but I've had some close calls.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, I've certain things that'll lead up to that where if I could just take a step back, and maybe it'll even be like, hey, fuck it, I got to quit this job for the day. Like that's a lot better than something bad happening. Sometimes that needs to happen.
Sure.
So I think, being able to look at it macro, not micro, that would help me. And also, I'm a pretty damn good climber, so I'm pretty average. I'm pretty average. And I'm not trying to set the world on fire every day, but I do think that there's a lot to be learned out there. But
I think that's also a great segue to keep you rolling, Grady. What do you think your hardest day of tree work was? What does that look like? The hardest day that you've ever had in tree work, what does that look like?
Every day at Pine Tree.
The hardest day of tree work doesn't even compare to the hardest day. The 24-hour shifts in wildland fire.
Oh, that's terrible.
Those were really bad. You just had to be on your feet for 24 hours. A lot of the time, you're not even staring in the direction or if you're going initial attack and you have to be out there for 24-hour shifts, just going hard.
Is there any specific story that stands out in your mind?
There's a couple close calls. I remember in wildland, I was on a BLM crew out of Fairbanks, Alaska, called the Midnight Sun Hot Shots, and for most of that 2008,
for our listeners, you want to explain to them what the BLM is?
Bureau of Land Management. About a third of the land, don't quote me on that, but I think about a third of the land in North America is run by the BLM.
Oh.
So you have the U.S. Forest Service, you have BLM land, then you have private property. BLM constitutes about a third, I think, at least in Colorado. So the Bureau of Land Management, they have to have those fire crews. So I was on an initial attack shot crew, and, crazy things would happen. We'd get big rounds rolling down the hills, people having to dodge out of the way, people getting slight burns, poison ivy, poison oak in the lungs from inhaling the smoke. People having to be sidelined. I think we had 5 or 6 people quit that year, which is why I was able to get on the crew. Quit or hurt, breaking ankles, people getting poison oak so bad that they just swell up. But that, and then you have to sleep in the dirt, and then you got to wake up at 0400 and do it all over again. In tree work, I get to go home every night. So, and like I said earlier, I get the warm touch of a woman every night, which is great compared to that shitty fireline food and sleeping in the dirt. But a bad day of tree work is when somebody gets hurt. And I have had very few minor accidents on my work sites, some of which can't even be helped. Did some work overseas in New Zealand for a year. The very first job I ever worked in New Zealand, we were removing a bunch of pahutakawa trees, indigenous tree over there. Beautiful in December because they flower. Call them the New Zealand Christmas tree. But anyways, we were mitigating some pahutakawas right by a school, and old Wayne Raharui, God bless him, had a heart attack. Right there, my first day of work, he had a heart attack. And it's like, we probably couldn't have done much different than what we were doing, but he's still sidelined. The ambulance, we call the ambulance, and the ambulance just drives straight past us. And I was like, uh-oh. There's certain situations like that get kind of scary, people hurting themselves, lacerations, coming in contact with the chainsaw, that'll happen from time to time. You just have to do everything you can to mitigate it. Those are the worst days of work. Being tired is one thing. Having to take a trip to the hospital, especially if it's in an ambulance. We just had somebody locally here real recently took an ambulance ride. Thank God he's okay. But, that's a wake-up call right there. That's the shittiest day of work you can have.
Yeah.
Is when somebody's down for the count on the DL for a while because they did something that is probably pretty fucking preventable,
Yeah. Now, this is going to be a little off topic, but down that same road is I'm a firm believer of recognizing that that we're industrial athletes, and that when those days start getting long and we start getting tired, to call it quits. Like, production doesn't meet every aspect of our job,
and that's going to piss off Dad, aka the boss.
Yeah.
But also, you got to be able to make that call.
I want to do this for a lot longer, and I don't want to keep ruining my body, and I know it's only going to get worse. And I'm only 33 now, and I'm already having aches and pains. I don't want to know what it's going to be like when I'm 50,
Right.
So identifying, hey, this isn't going to work, and getting a good stop and getting a plan and assessing the situation and moving on is an objective for me.
Right.
Which
I think I think some of that has to do with the bottom line. I think a lot of that, especially in the private industry with quotes or misquotes, people get frustrated when they're out there busting their ass and whoever bid the job didn't bid it correctly. And you're looking at your bottom line and you're like, it looks like you're not busting your ass when you are because you're not making that bottom line, but it's not really your fault.
Yeah.
You know? So, I don't know. What do you think, Geoff?
I'd like to change gears and talk with Alex a little bit more over here. Alex, what do you think? What do you think in your experience, like, stands out to you as like one of your more memorable like wins, one of your sort of outstanding accomplishments that made you feel like you made it, like you're like, oh man, I'm bona fide now. Like, how did that happen for you, if it did happen, and could you detail it here for the listeners?
Honestly, that's a really hard question to answer because I mean, everyone is their own toughest critic, right? So there's definitely trees. I remember there was some plains cottonwoods here that I got contracted out to go climb, and I got up it. I finally got to my tie-in, and I was just shitting bricks, and I was like, this is like, there's hollows all over the place. There was a fucking raccoon staring at me. I was like, this is way over my pay grade. Like, I'm like 3 years in, maybe a solid year of climbing. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, I'm not getting paid enough for this. And I like bomb out of the tree. Well, a few weeks later, I get asked, hey, we got these cottonwoods to remove. At the time, I think you worked with them. Rob Hayes was the climber. Yeah. But he was definitely my mentor for the longest time. And anytime I got uncomfortable, he would always take over. And well, he was gone on vacation, so now is my time to shine. And I remember going out as backyard cottonwoods, and I pressed through that pressure of getting it done. And I did get the job done. But looking back on it, that's one thing that I find is a struggle in this industry. Is, yeah, we can go to these trainings and we can learn something one day and be like, oh, this is how you set up an anchor for SRT. Like, oh, this is how you use it. All right, good luck, go use it. But then you don't actually have anybody out there mentoring you and like catching you doing something like, don't fucking do that right now. Right. That is going to be a really bad idea. And you find yourself just doing it because you think you need to do it because you're trying to be better. And, you know, I've done some removals, and like you said, you know, you find yourself like, oh, I did this removal. And then you go back and look at those trees and you're like, well, those really weren't that big. So now you're like,
So I'm kind of a pussy.
yeah, exactly. You know, so it's hard to say like, this is what made me like an elite person. And honestly, it's nice coming over to, you know, find tree service with the crane and like, you know, knowledgeable people and people that are experienced, and like 100% like what I was when I left Save a Tree. I went and did a year management, and then even this last year, like that, the climber that I was then and what I am now is like 100% better. Like, I've got all the knowledge, but I didn't have the experience of like being able to rappel out of a 100-foot tree like once a week out of my day. It was usually go prune ash trees 30 feet tall all day, every day, you know?
Yeah. So.
Well, yeah, you know, I always measure my success by our failures. So kind of segueing both those two things together, because I honestly feel that the hardest thing to do in the industry is to witness something catastrophic and know all of these elements that led up to that.
Sure.
And then also know that you have to go and do that same thing again the very next day. And a great example, you know,
Or 2 seconds later.
I think you guys were no longer, well, I shouldn't say no longer. You guys weren't currently with the boys over there with Fine Tree and Fine Crane Service, but we became notorious at one point in time for flipping a crane. I actually got a front row seat to watch that thing come over. I'm sitting in the top of a linden tree, and I am watching the crane sort of make picks commonly as they, you know, just pulling them out. But in one instance, I watched the boom do sort of a kind of a weird little figure eight in the air. And it seemed odd to me. I was interested to know what the crane operator's sort of idea behind getting that piece out was. And as they sort of boomed out to the north, I started to see the riggers lift up onto the crane. in that moment, all I could do was rappel out of the tree. Like I wrapped out of the tree as fast as I could. We went and we got the crane operator out because the crane is now sitting probably about 12 foot into the air at a 45-degree angle.
So just a little background on what happened. You guys were about, 100 plus feet out?
Easy 115. Crane was good for probably about 3,200 pounds.
And you guys were about 1,000 pounds over.
Yeah, I think they tried to pick 48.
So 1,000 pounds on like 30?
It was a Siberian
35-inch Siberian.
No Saibo elm, a silver maple,
Silver maple, really?
Silver maple. And honestly, probably the thing that saved the climber's life, as the silver maple was multi-stem. It had like 4 or 5 leads, and when I went to the backyard, the climber is just hunkered down in the crotch, kind of in a fetal position, and the boom tip is only about 5 inches from his head, and it actually just got caught.
Shout out Matt Carruthers.
Matt Carruthers, we love you. But for me, that was one of my hardest days, because like moments after, I remember looking at Matt and being like, "Hey man, are you okay?" And he checked his body. Like he was in a surreal position where he was pretty sure he was dead. I'm like, "No, you're still doing tree work. You didn't get that lucky today." I asked him if he needed help out of the tree, and he refused. He was only a few feet off the ground. We got him out of there, and then a really hard moment for me was like I actually had to go back, and ascend back into the top of that linden tree, and all of these emotions and things. Like I just
saw the maple.
Yeah.
Maple.
No, I'm going back to the tree work.
You're climbing.
Yeah,
you're pruning another tree. I got you.
And at this point, that's when we're calling crane companies to try to lift the crane, but we still have a job to do.
And I think it was, from my understanding, it went over, but there was no like catastrophic crash into the house.
No.
It just kind of rested.
Super graceful.
Super like a swan landing in a lake.
It almost was. It literally looked almost like time stopped. The crane came over very, very slowly. And it stopped in its position. I believe the only damage that was done was about five pickets of fence were broke. Like that was
then that fucking grove had to be reconfigured and everything had to be gone back.
Correct. But that, I feel like that was my defining moment. Like if you can see something that is supposed to be bulletproof.
Well, there's 2 kinds of crane operators.
Yeah. Well,
those who have and those who haven't tipped the crane.
Oh, wow.
From what I understand, the longer that you do it, the likelihood of it happening is almost guaranteed.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some sketchy situations.
Yeah.
You got to watch out for them, and you got to put that in your toolbox and learn from it.
Well,
every
exactly.
Day. Every day.
That's the trick.
Every day you got to learn from it.
Internalize that.
Yeah. You got to think about it with a couple beers, go back to the shop, talk about it, and my God, put that in your toolbox and think about it for next time. There's nothing more valuable than learning from mistakes.
One of the things that we were just talking with our new hire, Jack, about was, everyone's like, don't get complacent. But the funny thing is, I kind of feel like comfort is a form of complacency.
Absolutely.
So you keep doing those same picks every day, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, the crane's going to be able to pick this up. I know 100% it will. And you cut it, and then it can't pick it up. Yeah.
So sometimes it can't, because we redline that thing sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's just for line pull, and it's just going to be the winch that's going off beeping at us, and it's not because the crane's going to tip over, but So
I feel like we've done a bunch of talk about ourselves and experiences and all that stuff. It sounds good, but again, let's try to shift gears and move towards something that maybe is a little more what's the word for that? A little more
deeper.
I don't want to go deeper.
Want to go to the heart?
I do not want to go to the heart. Where I'd like to go, honestly, is like, well,
Jeffy wants to go deeper.
Just a few more beers, and there's going to be tears.
Oh yeah, here we go.
Well, I'd like to know.
Somebody get this kind of beer.
And I think our listeners would like to know, like, what piece of gear do you think
is a piece of
everyone should have in their bag, and why? What is one piece of gear you? I mean, I'm a bit of a gearhead too, but I like what is your one piece that you would be like, hey man, like this is the thing that changed things for me. This is the thing that makes everything kind of fit together. The one thing that you don't leave the shop without?
A Blake Sitch.
Well, elaborate on that. What are you talking? Are you talking split tail?
There's so much gear out there, and especially because now I've got the certification where I can evaluate people interested in getting their tree worker, and I can't tell you how many times people walk up with a fucking zigzag and a Kimbo, a new rope run. Or
The bling is what you call it.
Yeah,
bling.
the
You just
bling.
need the fucking rope, bro.
Yeah, right.
Tell me one thing you're gonna need a fucking rope for.
And they don't know how to tie a knot, and if that thing starts to slip on them and they're freaking out and they don't know how to tie a Blake Sitch to get themselves to the ground, I'm not saying the Blake Sitch is the most amazing piece of equipment. I'm just saying you need to know how to tie it and you know how to use it before you move on to the nice, advanced Ferraris of tree climbing.
You're not gonna get far without a saw.
Yeah.
Let's go with the Tsurugi hand saw.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That's my favorite right there.
Big boy.
Yeah, that's real arborist doesn't need a chainsaw. No. I think the Tsurugi hand saw. Can't go wrong with the Tsurugi, especially for those tight crotches. You know we're always getting into those tight crotches.
No, yeah.
Just ask your mom.
Colorado.
I guess for me, honestly, guys, I don't know how you feel about this. Early on in my career, again, I was actually a big proponent on the Blake Sitch.
Yeah.
I climbed on that beeline split tail for so many years. Even after the eye-to-eyes were starting to populate the industry, I was still climbing on the beeline sort of split tail and refused for some reason. I was seeing these come up in the industry, the foot ascender. I was seeing them come up, refused. I thought it was something that was beneath me, was something that wasn't practical, and a few years later, I started, doing some of these SRS systems and incorporating some advanced systems into my repertoire. And I mean, I honestly, I do not leave the shop. There is a foot ascender stashed always somewhere in my gear these days.
I think I have one of your foot ascenders still in my bag. I was like, is this? Do you climb with the lefty?
I don't know.
No, maybe not. All right, then. Yeah, I mean, so
for me, it's the foot ascender. I don't know what it was. Maybe it's because I hip thrusted for so many years.
Sure.
The hip thrust and the foot lock had become such an ingrained part of my of just what I did day to day that I was a little bit archaic to it, and I refused to advance. And I wish I would have heeded some advice from some of the other arborists I was working with, who would be like, "Hey man, this is groundbreaking," and I'm like, "No, foot locking is groundbreaking," and foot locking is just painful. I mean, if you can get one,
It really is.
I absolutely implore anyone to understand how to do the hip thrust. It's an essential. It's definitely one of the first things you learn. But outside of knowing how to do it, like there's better ways to do things. That, for me personally, the foot ascender makes me feel pretty good.
you gotta be you gotta be a little more lightweight. Can't be 220, 230 foot locking up a tree. There's some guys out there that can do it. I'm not one of them.
I got to the point where I actually really shout out to Mike Powers. I really got into the power sender that got mounted on your spur, doing a lot of crane work, honestly, like setting straps and having to go up and down on that sort of that free floating independent anchor system, like hip thrusting that kill you. So like I said, I put a foot ascender in my bag. I put a foot ascender on my hooks, and I mean my body has thanked me ever since then.
Next. Sweet.
Well, that's it.
Who needs a beer?
I think that getting a beer should be the end of the podcast.
Cheersing should be the end of the podcast.
Sure, yeah, I'm okay.
Are you guys down to go listen to some Charlie Wagner?
Well, yeah, we got Charlie Wagner on the mic right now.
Hey, a couple shout outs to you guys got any shout outs?
I want to give a shout out to the Academy Training Service, who's put on a fantastic seminar
100%.
here in Loveland, Colorado. They really brought a lot of guys from out of state and really nailed it. Brought a lot of things home. And for me, I don't know, there was a lot of people talking at the end of that sort of wrap up, but for me, it really felt like the day was about body positioning. Like holding
staying
yourself,
comfortable.
Yeah.
holding yourself
Staying
accountable to
Yeah.
getting into the correct position to make cuts and providing people with the tool.
If you're not comfortable, you're uncomfortable. And if you're uncomfortable, you're not going home happy. Yeah. You're going to be waking up grumpy as shit.
Yeah, that's the You know, the different systems, the redirects, the length, like the whole thing. Like I really felt like body positioning was the big thing for the take home today, for what you guys just said, for comfortability and safety. They kind of go hand in hand, you know.
100%.
They like to say, you know, you work smarter, not harder, right?
Yep. Shout out to, Jared and Charlie Wagner and my beautiful wife, Randy, Delaney, and Odessa. Daddy loves you.
Nice.
I'm out.
And that's the end of the podcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, guys, we're about to sign off. Thanks so much for listening. And as always, you know, you guys catch all of your latest arbor news here at the Two Tree Guys podcast. And we'll catch you next time.
Put 'em up, put 'em back. Stay safe.
See you.